Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy DeYoung. Welcome to Prophecy Today video. This week, we celebrated the birthday of the United States of America. On July 4th, it was a great celebration, and indeed, people were thinking about how this nation came into existence. Is the United States in Bible prophecy? That's a question often asked, and we'll deal with that in just a moment. But this last week, on our radio broadcast, Prophecy Today, we had conversations with our broadcast partners, and we discussed how many nations are involved in current events that seemingly are setting the stage for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. By the way, if you'd like to listen to those interviews, go to our website, prophecytoday.com. There on the front page, PTRN, Prophecy Today Radio Network. It's radio on demand when you want it at your convenience. And listen to all of the interviews I did with Colonel Bob McGinnis, Israel Madad in Israel, Itamar Marcus also watching the Palestinian media, and Dr. Rob Congdon, who updated us on the European Union. You might want to pass these conversations along to a friend of yours, send them an email, tell them where they can go and listen. But here today on Prophecy Today video, I want to just give you a glimpse of some of the conversations we had. For example, with Colonel Bob McGinnis, I talked about General Petraeus, and I said, Bob, General Petraeus is back in Afghanistan. Will he be successful?
Of course, it depends upon how you define victory. He has now become President Obama's man. Before, he was President Bush's man. And he was, I suppose, rightly praised for the good work that he was able to do in Iraq. Now, of course, Iraq is still result uncertain, though it looks favorable in terms of having turned around the crisis that we faced at the end of 2006 and the beginning of 2007. The wars in Afghanistan versus Iraq are radically different. Very different population, very different tribal situation, ethnic situation. They're predominantly, of course, Sunni, and so you don't have the Shia-Sunni divide as much, even though there are Shia in the west near Herat. I'm not optimistic, in part because I don't think Dave Petraeus is going to get all the things that he wants. Optimistically, he would get more troops, and of course, everyone's going to balk at that. He's going to ask for more time, and that's been an issue of some contention on the Hill because counterinsurgencies take a lot longer than I think President Obama has time for. And of course, the cooperation for Pakistan and the cooperation which we need critically from Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, is very, very tenuous. So given those factors, I think Petraeus will try to work some miracles, but I don't expect that he's going to be able to do it. And unfortunately, this time next year, we'll be talking much about the same. It may be that they'll declare victory and come home, but victory is hard to define. The way I define victory is fairly simple. It's a government in place that respects the U.S., that maintains democratic principles, a government that can secure itself on its borders and internally, and will not allow Al-Qaeda or transnational terrorist organizations to use its territory for launching operations. Now, that's a very simplistic view, but I don't even think we can reach that in the next couple of years.
That was Colonel Bob McGinnis talking about the Afghan situation. Israel Madad was asked the question on our radio broadcast. Here's what he had to answer when I talked to him about the President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting that will take place this week. But then I reminded him that the Saudi king was the first to meet with President Obama before he met with the Prime Minister. And was this a setup for putting pressure on Netanyahu? Is this normal?
It's a well-known diplomatic maneuver to gang up on someone by having a few of the opposing parties come first, and then you say to in this instance, for example, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, listen, I've just spoken to that king, that president, and that terrorist, and this is the game plan, and now you can't let me down. And Mr. Netanyahu says, well, the United States policy has always been for negotiations. I'm willing to negotiate. I even made some very dramatic statements from an ideological, political point of view over the past year. I've even agreed to the suspension of construction in the communities. You're forcing me also to stop in Jerusalem, our capital, and now you tell me this is what I have to do? I don't know if that's the proper way that friends and allies should be dealing with the issues. Mr. Obama should know that over the past 40 years, Israel has always tried to reach some sort of compromise which doesn't endanger its security. And the reason why there hasn't been an agreement is not Israel. It's because of the Arab attitude, which really hasn't changed over these years, even though perhaps it's suits and ties rather than keffiyehs and robes, is really not the way to go for someone who claims to be very progressive and liberal and democratic.
Winky Madad, our broadcast partner in Israel. Itamar Marcus is the director of Palestinian Media Watch. He watches 24/7 the Palestinian media to help us understand what they're really saying, not what they are telling to the English-speaking world. The Mufti, a high-ranking Muslim cleric in Jerusalem, this week had something to say about the Jews as enemies of Allah and the Mufti. I wondered who he was and what gives him the opportunity to talk about these things, especially as it relates to the threat the Jews are to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Itamar?
First of all, the Mufti is the senior most important religious figure in the Palestinian Authority. He was appointed by Mahmoud Abbas, so he represents the Palestinian Authority and the religious ideology of the Palestinian Authority. Now, the sermon is given every Friday in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is their holiest religious place. As you know, it was built over the area of the temple. As Muslims have done throughout history, they've built their mosques on Christian holy places and on Jewish holy places. And the significance of what he said was actually beyond even the fact that he's accusing Israel of wanting to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He also said that the Jews were the enemies of God. Now, by defining Jews as the enemies of God, what you're saying is it's not we Palestinians who think the Jews are a problem. It's saying that God himself thinks that the Jews are a problem, and therefore you are literally saying whoever attacks, whoever fights, whoever even kills Jews is doing God's work, because God is the enemy of the Jews are the enemy of God. In this week's alert, we actually included an alert we had a few months ago where a different religious cleric from the Palestinian Authority on official Palestinian TV actually combined these two messages. He said the Jews are the enemies of humanity, the enemies of Allah, the enemies of the Muslims, and therefore the Prophet Muhammad said to kill the Jews. So this is the worst kind of hate promotion there is, when you're saying it's not we people who hate the Jews, but it's God himself who hates the Jews.
Well, indeed, when he gives these sermons, is he not inciting the Muslim faithful to go out and start killing Jews?
Absolutely. And when you say the Muslim faithful, according to polls in the Palestinian Authority, 97% of Palestinians consider themselves either religious or very religious. So when the Mufti tells them that the Jews are the enemies of Allah, what he's telling 97% of his population is that the Jews are not only a legitimate target, but actually a worthy target, because that is what God's expecting of you.
Itamar Marcus, director of Palestinian Media Watch, keeping us informed of actually what the Palestinian media is saying. Dr. Rob Congdon gives us the European Union update. I said to Rob in our conversations this last week, the European Union is involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Talk to us about that.
Oh, absolutely. Always remember the EU is straddling the fence between the Arab Islamic nations and Israel. And then the other factor you always have to remember is the EU is enormous. So you have one bureaucracy that is helping Israel, you'll have another bureaucracy that's actually hindering Israel. And they don't know what each other is doing. So you're dealing with a vast network. The potential to cause problems in Israel is great, for the simple reason that they deeply are involved in Israel.
Rob, at the same time, European Jews are saying that in Europe today, the situation is worse than it was at the end of World War II. Your comments?
No, I have a friend who lives in Sweden, and he said the country is rapidly becoming Islamic, and Malmo, which is the third largest city in Sweden, it's getting unsafe for Jewish people to walk the streets there. And Sweden is well ahead in the movement, if you will, to take over by the Islamic movement. But you've got France and England also. Jewish people are reevaluating their safety in Europe once again. And I, from what I'm getting reports, I'm hearing the same thing. So it is getting bad, and they're going to have to either decide to leave come here or go to Israel.
Dr. Rob Congdon with that report on the European Union. May I remind you that the Lord himself brought nations into existence. In the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 1, God tells Noah and his 3 sons, plus their 4 wives, to be fruitful, multiply, and repeople the earth. Well, chapter 10, verse 1, starts out with the record of at least the beginnings of the obedience by the 3 sons of Noah and Noah himself to be fruitful, multiply, and repeople the earth. We see that these 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all were going to have boys. Japheth, in verses 2, 3, 4, and 5, has some sons. You may have heard of their names before: Magog, Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah. Those are names in prophecy over in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38. These were sons of Japheth, grandsons of Noah, and they went to a certain location in this world. They took their families with them after everything separated from Nimrod's city, Babel, located on the shores of the Euphrates River in what is modern-day Iraq. God said, that's not what I want to happen. He caused the language, the single language, to be confused, and then everybody had to spread out across the world, accomplishing what God told them to do. Well, all of Noah's grandsons did exactly that. As their fathers had boys and they went to different locations, they trained their family in a new language, they raised up their family, and they established nations. You can look at that. It's in verse 5 of Genesis chapter 10, verse 20, also in verses 30 and 31. These are the sons of these boys of Noah who established the nations. And God has used nations. He put in place government, human government, Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6. He's used human government down through the years. He will continue to do that. Revelation 17:17 say God put in the heart of leaders of this world, human government leaders, to accomplish his will. Many ask, where's the United States in Bible prophecy? It's Zechariah chapter 14, verse 2. United States not specifically mentioned, but it is in the fact that all nations will gather against Israel and against the return of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in the city of Jerusalem, Zechariah 14:2. By the way, for 7 years before that happens, there's going to be judgment on the earth. There will be an alignment of nations. They're talked about in Daniel 11, Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83. They're the Islamic nations who will come against the state of Israel in the last days at the beginning of that 7-year tribulation period, before at the end the Battle of Armageddon takes place. God is using human government. He has down through history. He will continue. But before all of this is fulfilled, the rapture is next. And having said that, nothing left for me to say except let's keep looking up until